Greetings. I'm Bill Kladke of the Greater Baltimore Community Housing Resource Board, and I'd like to welcome you to today's edition of Neighborhood Beat. Our guest today is Mr. Louis S. Diggs, who's an historian of African American settlements. And Louis is here, if I may call you Louis?
Of course.
Louis is here to talk to us about various African American settlements in our area. So welcome.
Right, thank you, Dr. Kladke, and I would like to call you Bill if it's okay.
Please, yeah, please.
Well,
please.
I really appreciate your having me here,
Certainly.
because I think it's just wonderful that I'm given an opportunity to share with the wider community the history of these African American communities in Baltimore County.
That's great. Well, thank you for being here. Let's first talk about why did you get into this? How did you get into this?
Well, Bill, you know I retired from the military 20 years and retired from federal government 20 years. And you know, when I fully retired, I was teaching a class once at Catonsville High School. I was a substitute teacher. I really felt that they needed an African-American mentor.
Right.
And I was very accustomed to working with children. Part of my 20-year career, military career, I was Sergeant Major of the ROTC at Morgan College, and we were creating officers out there. So I felt comfortable with kids.
Right.
And I was in the D.C. public school system for 20 years as well. But anyhow, I was teaching this class of how to research your roots and about communities. And when the class was over, the black children of Catonsville came to me and said, Mr. Diggs, we simply could not find a history. They said they had gone to the library, to the Historical Society. They said they really couldn't find anything.
Well, what a shame.
Yes, it was a shame. And they asked me if I could find the history for them. And you know yourself, Bill, that's a challenge that any concerned adult would take.
Right.
So I took the kids up on it. And even though I'm not from Catonsville, I married a girl from there, been out there almost 50 years, I began to delve into the history of that community and found tons of history. And I was able to put it together in a booklet form, a booklet called It All Started on Winters Lane. I got a grant from Baltimore, from the Maryland Humanities Council, because I had to give it away. You know, it clearly says this booklet, not a book. I took it to the book form. But I gave these kids a really good idea of what their history was like from slavery up to the present day.
That's wonderful. What was their reception?
They were absolutely carried away with it.
I bet.
I was carried away with it more than them, to be honest with you, because I felt that I shouldn't stop on this one book, and I went on to do others.
Yeah, I know that you've received some grants that have helped you along in this too, which is really commendable that some of our government agencies have done this to encourage this, because it's a shame, and it's a vestige of the extreme segregation and the prejudice that was characteristic of our society back how many years, and it still to a certain extent is characteristic and needs to be fought.
That's true.
But it's wonderful they stepped to the plate.
Yeah, especially Baltimore County government. I have to give them credit. The Office of Community Conservation. They said to me when I approached them about a grant, and after they looked at what I did, and they said, well, you know, our job is to preserve history of these communities in Baltimore County. And what better way can you preserve history than put it in book form?
I especially believe that your books are interesting, and I know you're not making any money on these books. It's a real true service that you're doing to the community, which we thank you for. But I think that what's important for our viewers to understand is that these books are not just writing history, they are real, living history.
Positively. Every one of my books, I delve very deeply in oral history from seniors. As a matter of fact, Bill, I'm sure you know about African American history. I know you know about it. And you know that many historical things are never recorded, never documented.
Right.
African Americans, at least in Baltimore County, from slavery on, they were too busy trying to eke out a living. Who had time to document things?
Right.
Besides, I found an awful lot of them couldn't read nor write.
Right.
So how could they do it?
And careers in academics, at least in the book publishing side of academics, were closed to them.
That's true. Very, very true.
And so the histories that were being written of the presidential memoirs and all the rest of this stuff were never really written on the day-to-day lives of African Americans.
Hey, boy, you're absolutely right there. My goodness. But I feel very, very good about this. Here in Baltimore County, we have 40 designated historic African American communities.
Where are they located?
They're located all over Baltimore County. The whole spectrum of the county is pockmarked with these settlements, and 99% of them rose up from slavery. And these five books that I've written bring most of them up, from the slavery era. So my goal, though, is to document the history of all 40. I've done about 20 now, and I just hope I have enough in this old 70-year-old body to finish doing the other.
I hope so too. The other interesting thing about African American settlements is that there's a lot of suburbanites in Baltimore County that are living right on top of African American settlements.
Boy, you are
and they don't know it.
No idea at all.
Give an example.
An example is Chatelaine, out in Green Spring Valley, where the ultra-rich have always lived. They go up and down Green Spring Valley from Ricestown Road up to Villa Julie College and never know they go through an African-American community. That little community of Chatelaine, which is located, it begins on the corner of Green Spring Valley Drive and what was Railroad Avenue. I don't know what it is now. And then for a few more blocks. That's a small enclave of blacks. You can really tell that you're in this community when, I know you're familiar with that road, when you come off of, say, Ricestown Road, you make a turn on to Green Spring Valley. Let's say you're going out to Villa Julie College. Well, as you go down Ricestown Road, you make a significant bend to the left. You have got to be very careful to make that bend. As soon as you have finished that bend, there's a small white church on the right-hand side. You're now entered Chatelaine. And those blacks have been there since slavery.
How many folks live there?
Not too many now.
Not too many.
I think there are no more than 3 or 4 black families.
But they're the excuse me, they're the descendants of the slaves.
Yes,
that were there.
Yes, indeed. Slaves that people not aware of up on Ricestown Road, where African Americans and others go to weddings in what's the name of that big reception hall?
Right.
Gray Rock.
Right.
One gentleman whose name is he's a Diggs too, and I can't think of his name.
Mr. Diggs.
Mr. Diggs. He is a cousin of the black superintendent, first female superintendent, Alice Penderhughes. People think she come from Baltimore, but she was born and raised right there in Chatelaine. He took me up there to show where his family came from slavery. And would you believe right behind that huge mansion, there's an attached slave quarter still there.
Really?
I had no idea until he mentioned to me. Then when we came back down Ricestown Road, we made a shortcut through Craddock Lane, and sure enough, there was another original slave quarters in a place called, oh, goodness sakes. You can't miss it.
Right. Right. Let's talk about your other books.
Okay.
In the second half of this show, we're going to talk about your newest 2 books.
Right.
But your first book was Winter's Lane, and I think your second book was Holding On to Our Heritage?
Second was Holding On to Our Heritage. And Holding On to Our Heritage, this documented the history of 2 historic African-American communities. One in Ricestown is called Bond Avenue, truly been there since slavery. And the other is just 5 miles north in a community called Boring. The small segment in that Boring community is a little black enclave called Piney Grove. The church is still there. No African Americans are there today. A lot of them, some still own property there, but no African Americans. And that's why I titled the book Holding On to Their Heritage, because they are struggling to hold on to their heritage.
Right.
The little black church is there, but no African Americans.
Yes, so it's just suburbanized.
In a sense.
In a sense, yeah.
And then, of course, down on Bond Avenue, people there, their ancestors coexisted with slaves, especially from slaves of the Worthingtons. There is one lady, Annie Milligan, I think she's 80 or 90 years old now, and she shared stories with me from her grandfather, who talked about, he coexisted with slaves doing some kind of work, and would come home and mention to his children and grandchildren about, you know, life there. And then one of the really unique things that happened in Bond Avenue back in 1834, a few years before slavery ended, there was a little church there called Asbury Chapel. Today it's the very large Reisterstown United Methodist Church. They permitted the slaves to come and practice their religion. And the historian of that church gave me the class list. From that started the little church that's on Bond Avenue now, St. Luke's United Methodist Church.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Really good history.
I know that some of our viewers, I'm sure, would be interested in finding out how they could get a hold of your books. I know that they are for sale.
They are for sale. I don't have too many of them in the bookstores, to be honest with you. I simply refuse to pay that 40 to 50% of the selling price of the book. Besides, I take a big loss on these books as it is.
So how can somebody get in contact with you?
They can call me by telephone, 410-747-6812, or can go to my website, which is www.lewisdiggs.com, and they can order the book. I do not charge postage. This way, the person that gets my book always get an autographed copy. And it's like getting it in a bookstore, except you don't have to pay postage.
Right. So so it's a little cheaper, actually.
Actually, yes.
Yeah, actually.
And it's valuable because of the autograph.
Absolutely. And all of your books are available by contacting you?
Oh, yes. Yes, okay. All of them are available.
Okay. After the break, we're going to talk about your most recent couple books.
Okay.
And we'll see some shots from some pictures that you've gathered from in the process. But I know you have pictures all through these books too.
Oh yes, they're full of pictures and full of interviews. As a matter of fact, Bill, on the pictures, I have in excess of 6,000 pictures of black life in Baltimore County. I put them on display primarily at an African American Culture Festival that we have in Towson, September every year. But I take them all over. And when I go out for lectures, and I am available to lecture anywhere, and those that can provide tables, I share the photographs with them.
That's wonderful. Let's talk more about it after the break.
Sure.
After the break, we're going to be continuing our discussion with Lewis Diggs, a historian of African American settlements. And Lewis is going to talk about his most recent books, one of which is published in January of 2003. Stay with us, and we'll be right back.
Without proper preservation and conservation, the rich ethnic and cultural heritage of Maryland could just dry up and blow away. Contact the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development and find out how you can be a part of history. Call 410-514-7661 or visit our website at www.marylandhistoricaltrust.net.
Welcome back. In this segment, we continue our discussion with Lewis Diggs, an historian of African American settlements in our area. And we talk about a couple of his latest books, and in fact, one that's still in manuscript, right, Lewis?
Right. My latest book, it's actually going to be titled From the Meadows to the Point, and it documents the history of this marvelous community. It's called Turner Station, down in the far southwest corner of Baltimore County. And the community, African-American community, that was on Sparrows Point from the 1880s until the